Part 1. The Unseen Doorway. Daniel had always been a man of routine. He worked a 9-to-5 job, spent weekends with his friends, and lived alone in a modest apartment in the city. But it was in the middle of one ordinary night that everything changed. It started with a dream, a scream in the dark, piercing and full of despair. The scream wasn't his, but it sounded real. So real that it jolted him awake. His heart raced, his breath shallow as he lay in bed, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. He tried to shake off the eerie sensation that clung to him like a shadow. The next night, it happened again. Another scream, louder this time, like it was coming from the very core of his soul. But it wasn't just the scream that unsettled him. It was the feeling that it was familiar, like he'd heard it before, as if the scream had been waiting for him. He tried to ignore it, chalking it up to a bad dream or his overactive imagination. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Night after night, the screams continued. They would wake him from his sleep, always at the same time, always at the same pitch. He couldn't understand why, but they seemed to be calling out to him, begging for help. He thought about seeking medical help, maybe an ear infection or some kind of auditory hallucination. But the screams, they felt like a warning. The dreams began to change. They were no longer just screams, they were visions. Flickering images of a city burning, people running in panic, and an ominous figure standing over it all. The figure, a shadowy silhouette, was somehow familiar, yet distant. It wasn't a person he knew, but he felt its presence in the very marrow of his bones. It was as if this shadow had been lurking in his life for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. But how? How could a dream be so vivid, so real? And why was he the one hearing these screams, feeling their weight as if they were his own? Daniel couldn't take it anymore. His mind was unraveling. The dreams were relentless, and the screams grew louder with each passing night. He started keeping a journal by his bed, writing down every detail, every image. He became obsessed with figuring out what it all meant. Maybe, if he understood the visions, he could put an end to the torment. He visited libraries, researching anything that could explain what was happening to him. He delved into ancient prophecies, scientific studies on dreams, and even quantum mechanics. Somewhere, buried deep in the pages of a dusty old book, Daniel found a term that caught his attention. Temporal Resonance. It was an obscure theory suggesting that certain individuals could hear echoes from the future, brief flashes of events yet to come, like ripples across time. It was dismissed by most as pseudoscience, but the more Daniel read, the more he felt a chill run down his spine. It explained everything. Everything. Except for one thing. Why him? One night, while combing through an old library archive, Daniel found a diary, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were from a man named Edward Colton, who lived in the 19th century. The diary detailed the same experiences Daniel had been having, dreams, screams, and strange visions of future disasters. Colton had written that he believed the screams were a warning, but he never figured out who was sending them or why. Colton's final entry was chilling. I fear the future is not ours to change. The screams will grow louder, and then silence. Daniel's heart raced. He felt a sense of dread fill his chest, but he couldn't stop reading. The words seemed to resonate with him on a level he couldn't explain. He was living Colton's nightmare. But was Colton merely a victim of fate, or had he somehow been involved in whatever was coming? Days turned into weeks, and the visions intensified. Daniel's world began to collapse around him. He could no longer tell where reality ended and the dream began. One evening, as he sat in his apartment, a voice echoed in his mind. "The future is coming, and you are the key." It was the shadowy figure from his dreams, but this time it wasn't a distant presence. It was right there, standing behind him, speaking directly into his consciousness. In a fit of panic, Daniel raced to the place where he had first heard the screams, a forgotten alleyway behind a deserted building. It was the same place from his dream, the place where the shadow had stood. He could feel it, the oppressive weight of fate bearing down on him as he stood there, frozen in terror. Was this the moment when everything would be revealed? Was he supposed to stop it? The wind howled through the alley, carrying with it the faintest whisper of a scream. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he realized that the scream was not from the past. It was coming from the future. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a call to action, and it was begging for him to make a choice. Daniel's world had fractured into pieces, each one more terrifying than the last. The visions continued to plague him, more vivid, more real, as if the future was no longer a distant concept, but a tangible thing that had already begun to unfold. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He knew the screams were not just his own, a collective cry from a future that was yet to be written. He couldn't keep running. He had to face the future, whatever it was, and he had to do it alone. There was no one to help him. His friends had distanced themselves, his family was worried, but Daniel couldn't explain what was happening to him. How could he? One evening, as he sat in his apartment staring at the wall, the shadow appeared before him, clear as day. It was there, standing at the foot of his bed. It spoke, but not in words. Its voice was a low hum, a vibration that rattled his very bones. "The future will come. You cannot stop it, but you can decide how it ends." The words were like a slap to his face. Could it be true? Was the future already determined, or did he still have a choice? The scream that had haunted him for so long filled the room, echoing from the depths of time. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow vanished, leaving only the deafening silence in its wake. Daniel sat in the darkness, his heart pounding, realizing that he had been given a choice. But what did it mean? Was the scream just a warning, or was it something more? A signal from the future to change the course of destiny? The next few days were a blur. Daniel could barely function. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. His mind was consumed by the choice he had to make. The future was waiting for him, but it felt like an impossible decision. How could he stop something he didn't understand? What if he failed? But then, something inside him shifted. The terror, the confusion, all of it faded into a strange clarity. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the source of the scream, the event that triggered the chain of destruction. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the lives of everyone. Daniel's footsteps led him back to the alley where it all began. The place felt different now, less like a nightmare, more like a crossroads. He didn't know if he was ready, but there was no turning back. He stood there in the cold, waiting for the future to reveal itself. And then it came. A massive explosion erupted in the distance, the ground shaking beneath his feet. The scream was deafening now, and it was no longer a distant sound from a dream. It was real. It was happening. And Daniel was standing at the very edge of time. The city around him burned as the future Daniel had seen in his dreams unfolded before his eyes. People screamed in panic as buildings collapsed, flames engulfed the streets. The shadowy figure stood in the distance, watching him. It was time. Daniel ran toward the chaos, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do, but he had to act. The screams in his head were now clear. They weren't just the cries of the dying. They were the screams of the future, calling out for someone to make a choice. He could change it, but at what cost? As he reached the center of the devastation, everything slowed down. He saw the moment when it all began, a single decision that could shift the course of the future. With trembling hands, he reached for the key to the catastrophe. In that instant, he made his choice. The scream was no longer a call for help. It was the sound of time being rewritten.